First, I want to start off this morning. I don't know why I grabbed this book. I haven't been reading it, but I feel like I need to share it. So, March 31st, The Shepherd's Voice. A time is coming when all who are in their graves will hear his voice and come out. Those who have done good will rise to live. John 5:28 and 29. A day is coming when everyone will hear Jesus' voice. A day is coming when all the other voices will be silenced. His voice and his voice only will be heard. Some will hear his voice for the very first time. It's not that he never spoke, it's just that they never listened. For these, God's voice will be the voice of a stranger. They will hear it once and never hear it again. They will spend eternity fending off the voices they followed on earth. But others will be called from their graves by a familiar voice, for they are the sheep who know their shepherd. They are servants who opened the door when Jesus knocked. Now the door will open again, only this time it won't be Jesus who walks into our house, it will be we who walk into his. I loved that this morning. Okay. So my name is Sarah Woolsey, and I'm a resident at Lily's house. I came to live there on August 19th of 2019. When I first got there, I was really searching for a new way to live and hoping to learn the skills to make some major life changes. Coming to Lily's house was definitely a divine appointment because although I was sober, I didn't have a clue on how to sustain it. I'm a completely different woman than the one who walked in the door on day one. The Lily's house helped me with each area of my life that addiction destroyed. And now I live each day knowing how truly blessed I am. I want to start with Psalm 40, 1 through 3, and then we'll begin with my childhood. I waited patiently for the Lord. He turned to me and heard my cry. He lifted me out of the slimy pit, out of the mud and mire. He set my feet on a rock and gave me a firm place to stand. He put a song in my mouth, a hymn of praise to our God. Many will see and fear the Lord and put their trust in him. You could say that I'm a poster child of dysfunction and addiction. I came from a broken home with my parents divorcing when I was in first grade. After they told me and my siblings, that's when my mother left. We didn't know where she went, when she was coming back, or what was going on. I remember feeling unworthy, unwanted, and unloved. I would carry that feeling with me into my adult life, always searching for something to make me feel whole and loved. From then on, I had the weight of the world on my shoulders. I remember thinking, how could she just leave and not even call? She did finally come back and things were never the same. I was expected to take care of the household and my sister. I always felt that I needed to be the responsible one because my mother wasn't. If she wasn't at work, she was drinking, drugging, and chasing after men. My sister and I watched her go through a string of bad relationships, being physically and verbally abused. We were very poor growing up, moving almost every other year in school, going through periods without utilities. My father was in and out of our lives dealing with mental instability when he became addicted to heroin. He overdosed and passed when I was 16. When what my sister and I needed was a mother, she chose men and crack cocaine. Dealing with her addiction and mental issues was very hard on us looking back. I believe she was just dealing as best she could given her own childhood trauma. Needless to say, she didn't make good choices and ended up letting strangers move in with us. This is when I had a mental break, and the next few years went by with me in a fog. I made my sister stay with friends because things had gotten so bad, and I ended up moving to Missouri with my aunt. At 17, my aunt gave me my first line of meth, and it seemed like the first time in my life I wasn't drowning in pain and insecurity. This wouldn't be the only addiction I began to feed. I was also shoplifting to fill that void. I was looking to anything and everything to be numb now. And although I remember hating my mother for chasing men who treated her poorly, or choosing men who treated her poorly, I started doing exactly that. My mother came back into my life after being incarcerated in Pennsylvania for a few years, and again, it seemed as though I needed to take care of her. Not long after this, I met the man who'd be my son's father and my next addiction. I immediately fell for him and how he made me feel. I was 23 and we'd only been together a few months when I had my first abortion. It was only a few days after finding out, and I hadn't let it even sink in. Afterwards, I hated myself and I couldn't stand to look at him. Of course, this started the beginning of our on-again, off-again abusive relationship. Shortly after, I ended up going to prison because I couldn't stay clean on probation. When I got out, I then moved down to Springfield again with my aunt, and I was right back to using. Although probation was going all right, it was only because I'd figured out how to cheat the system. I was sliding further and further into darkness, driving to Kansas City every couple of days for drugs. It was on one of those trips that I'd stopped to see Terry, and a short while later, I found myself in the hospital. My kidneys were shutting down, I was dehydrated and in pain. They had me take a pregnancy test, and it was positive. In an attempt to get away from the drugs and the lifestyle, I moved back to Cass County, only to end up at another drug house. When I told Terry I was pregnant again, he was furious. He said, "I don't know what you're going to do because I have no money." He wanted nothing to do with me or the baby, and I didn't see him again until the day I went into labor. So there I was, homeless, pregnant, and desperate. I went to the Pregnancy Resource Center in Harrisonville, and they had me apply to a maternity home in Harrisonville called Aaron's House. I was so scared and unsure of the future, but this is where the Lord called to me to show me that He's always been there and always will be when I'm ready. I'd known even as a little girl, though my family didn't go to church, that there was something greater than myself. While at Aaron's House, God placed people in my life who'd become like family. Clarissa, her husband David, and her 3 boys. Also, the live-in Christine and a handful of other wonderful women and their families. I hadn't known what it felt like to have people love me without expecting anything from me. I started attending church and working. The Lord really worked on my heart over the next few months. But looking back now, I wasn't ready. I wasn't planning on staying clean. I simply was because I was pregnant. Before this time, I hadn't even known there was another way to live. I didn't know that people live normal lives with salvation and peace. And I wasn't ready yet for what He was offering me, but there sure were a lot of seeds planted that would later on grow. I had my son Drake on April 18th, 2013. It was the most amazing experience that I'd ever had, but I was terrified, not knowing how to be a good mother and not wanting to do it alone. So when Terry showed up at the hospital, I let him walk right back into our lives. For a short time, I did okay. I was working. I had my own apartment and a car. But once I began using again, I quickly lost sight of God and wasn't able to keep my head above water for long. I lost everything before my son turned 3, mistakenly believing that I could do it all on my own. The next couple of years were my darkest yet. The damage I did to Drake was the most convicting and was really the turning point for me. What I was most ashamed of. I put my son through moving from place to place, allowing him to witness domestic abuse between the adults he loved most, his parents, and also my mother and I. I shut him out of rooms so that I could get high, and I would leave him with his grandma for days, always promising to come right home, but that was never the case. I was still going in and out of jail for shoplifting, so he'd never know when I'd be gone for a few days to weeks. And the further in the pit that I slid, the worse I felt about myself. I became everything I didn't want to be, and I was watching my son suffer the way I had as a child. Not only was I destroying my son, I was facing about 6 different charges and had just been placed on felony probation. And I found myself pregnant yet again. After this second abortion, all I could think of was how my son might be better off without me. I couldn't see a way out of the darkness, and I had nothing left but to cry out to God. Isaiah 43:1-2 says, "He who created you, Jacob, he who formed you, Israel, do not fear, for I have redeemed you. I have summoned you by name. You are mine. When you pass through the waters, I will be with you. When you pass through the rivers, they will not sweep over you. When you walk through the fire, you will not be burned. The flames will not set you ablaze. In spite of all I'd gone through, I know the Lord had been there and he waited for me. I knew once I made that step, I would never be the same. And although I was scared to death, I now had the courage to walk away. Walk away from the drugs, the relationship I'd been in for the last 10 years, and my family. On February 6, 2019, I went to inpatient treatment in Kansas City. My son stayed with his father for the time. I had no idea what I was doing, and I couldn't yet picture a different future. I just knew things could only get better once I was sober. I made it through inpatient and decided to go to the Mother and Children's Transitional Living, expecting to be able to bring Drake up there with me in the near future. Except when a family room came available, they didn't want to give it to me. I decided then it wasn't the place for me. And knowing I couldn't go back to my mother's, I moved in with Clarissa, still so unsure of the future. Drake's father and I couldn't speak to each other without arguing and didn't agree on where he would live, and he filed for custody. Little did I know I'd be back in jail on a probation violation. And while being locked up, Clarissa applied for me to a long-term treatment place that I could have Drake at called Lily's House. After being accepted there, I was sure I'd be released, but the judge had other plans for me, sentencing me to 90 days at the Kansas Residential Center, basically a work release. Once my release date got closer, I questioned still going to Lily's house. But Isaiah 30:21 says, "Your ears shall hear a word behind you saying, 'This is the way, walk in it,' whenever you turn to the right hand or to the left." After making up my mind, I knew this was the right choice. A peace came over me that I'd never felt. I was almost giddy. I knew God had something big in store for me, and when I stepped out in faith and trusted Him, my life started to drastically change. Going to the Lily's house, especially without my son at first, was tough, but it was God's plan and timing. I found exactly what I'd been lacking. The staff had helped equip me with the skills I needed to keep up my sobriety. I was no longer going through the motions. Psalm 3:3 and 4 says, "But you, Lord, are a shield around me, my glory, the one who lifts my head high. I call out to the Lord, and He answers me from His holy mountain." I found myself able to experience joy, and I have a confidence now, not only as a woman, but as a mother. I'm able to give my son what he needs. On December 20th, 2019, I was awarded full custody of my son, Drake, and he now lives with me. I have a part-time job, and I've celebrated 1 year sober in February. And today I'm learning to love myself because I know that God loves me. He blesses me each and every day. And His plans for me are so much more than I could have imagined. I'm so grateful for a chance to live an abundant life. With every day that passes, I'm proof that God can do anything, and I hope someone hears my story and it'll open their heart to the Lord. I want to thank my whole support system, the staff at Lily's house, the Vicks, and everyone here at Life Issues. To have the support that we do makes a world of difference, and I can't thank you all enough for everything you do, and I love you all. Thank you.
All right, good job.